Good. Oh. Perfect. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Planning and Heritage Advisory Committee meeting. It is 6 p.m. on November 14th, and I will call this meeting to order. I will pass it over to Assistant Lake to take attendance.
Mayor Zabian.
Present.
Councillor Leary Pinch is running a few minutes late. Councillor Jim Ivey.
Present.
Paul Beasley.
I am here.
Guide Furlani.
Present.
Jane Davis.
Present.
Tim Carr.
I'm here.
KJ Conyers-Steed.
Present.
Michelle Bourgeois.
Present.
And Mark Keogh.
And present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. So now we'll move into the election of the chair. As this is our first meeting of the new Planning and Heritage Advisory Committee, I will host the election of the chair. And once the chair is elected, I will pass the meeting over to them. So before we get into the election, I think it would be good to have the committee members go around the room and introduce themselves, perhaps share your name, the community that you come from, and the reason for applying for this committee or being nominated for this committee if you're a council member. Perhaps we'll start with the mayor.
Absolutely. Mayor Abraham Zabian, reside in Falmouth, represent the entire municipality. Sat on this committee for multiple years and appointed to it by council.
Hello, I'm Guido Guide Furlani. I am interested because I deem architecture and the zone development and land development fundamental to human wellness and the habitat. I am from Windsor, District 10. I was intending to run for election, but then I didn't have the time for. I am honored to have been appointed to this relevant office, and I'm not looking forward to be a chair, but because I need to learn the ropes first, honestly. But if there is a co-chair, I might be open to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
I'm Jane Davis. I'm one of the two Hantsport representatives. I was originally with the Hantsport and Area Advisory Committee and now with the Municipal Planning Advisory Committee. Obviously, Hantsport is our main focus for the resident members, but it's an overall picture that we look at and not just a tunnel vision view. So, but I do enjoy my time here, and I think that the staff do a great job. And sometimes we may sound a little harsh, but we're not really.
Tim?
My name is Tim Carr, and I'm the other Hantsport representative, I guess. I'm a small business owner in West Hants, and I enjoy this committee because I enjoy being, I enjoy participating in my community, and this is one of, I think, the best ways to do that.
Kayla, we're just going around before we elect the chair, just to introduce ourselves, what community you come from, and why you're interested in the Planning and Heritage Advisory Committee.
So I'm Kayla, as Sarah just said. I'm counselor for District 7, and I'm interested in PACAC because it's of interest to the residents within my district. So therefore, it's important to them. It's important to me.
Perfect. KJ?
Hello, everyone. I'm KJ Conyers-Steed. I am a new resident of Hantsport area. I just moved over there. My interests in this committee is I have a background in urban development and ensuring that it's community centric. So my approach is to ensure that as we develop, we have a community centric approach into it and try to create like a circular approach to development within the region.
Mark?
Yep, my name is Mark Keogh. I'm from Upper Vaughan, and I'm one of the West Hants representatives, and I'm just happy to be here. So our area can always be part of the conversation, and as well as the rest of West Hants as well.
Perfect. Jim?
Hi, thank you, Sarah. So my name's Jim Ivy from Windsor, District 11, Windsor South. And I'm a counselor, if I didn't say that. And so my interest in this committee is because it's got such a diverse look at where we've been in getting here. If we look at the historical or heritage part of what we have within this committee, kind of a guiding step to how we got here. The current short term for development agreements or proposals that may come before us and how we treat the land throughout West Hants, whether it's Windsor or beyond. And equally longer term, when we look at longer term planning. So where we're at now and where do we see ourselves being in 15 or 20 years, or what's our visioning for what we think West Hants will look like, that will draw and attract people here. And thank you.
Last but not least, Michelle.
My name is Michelle Bourgeois. I represent lovely scenic Curry's Corner. I guess what attracts me to this committee, I retired from a long career with the Halifax Region Municipality, so I bleed municipal politics when I cut myself, so just by the nature of what I did. So, and I really think it's important for people this is where the John Q. public, pardon the expression, can get involved in the work that shapes our municipality for the future. I'd much sooner get involved than criticize from afar. So, for better or worse, I like to be involved in what's going on.
Perfect. Thank you all. So now that we've learned a little bit about each other, we're going to take nominations for the chair of the Planning and Heritage Advisory Committee. So I'm going to call for nominations. Mark?
Yep. I was very happy to be part of this committee, the last session we had, and I firmly believe Tim Carr is the funnest chair of all committees in West Hants. So I would like to nominate him to continue in that role.
Thank you. Anybody else for nominations for the chair? Okay, the third and final call. Is there any other nominations for the chair? Okay, hearing no more nominations. Tim, do you accept the nomination as chair?
You know what? I wasn't going to, but that was that was a lovely thing to say. So yeah, I will absolutely, for sure. I would like to add that I think for the last little while, I don't think we had a vice chair like the last time. So I think it's really important that we have the nomination for that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So hearing no further nominations and only having one nomination before us, we have now elected Tim Carr as the chair of the Planning Advisory Committee for this 2-year term. So I will pass the meeting over to him and help you with the nomination for vice chair.
Is that custom to upload when this happened in the meeting? No? Okay.
So just to help Tim out while he's shuffling places here as the chair, I will call for nominations of vice chair of the Planning and Heritage Advisory Committee. Are there any nominations?
I nominate Mark Kehoe.
I'll nominate Michelle Bourgeois.
I nominate Mark as well.
And I'll nominate Guido Ferlani.
Are there any other nominations for vice chair? And for the third and final time, is there any nominations for vice chair? Okay, so we have 3 nominations here. Mark Kehoe, do you accept the nomination?
I am pleased that that was recommended, but I will decline.
Okay.
Thank you.
Michelle, you were also nominated. Would you accept the nomination?
Yes, I would accept that.
Okay. And Guy, you were also nominated as vice chair. Do you accept the nomination?
Ooh, that now make it a tie. It's kind of a
We
Okay.
will-
Well, yes, I said it, not expecting that, but I said that I was accepting a co-chair. So yes, I accept it.
Okay, perfect. So we have two nominees for vice chair. So on your tables, there are little green pieces of paper. If you can write on that piece of paper very clearly whether you vote Michelle Bourgeois or Guy Ferlani on that piece of paper, and we will collect them and tally them for you. Paul, in order to complete the vote, do you want to send? Okay, I see that there. So we do have a vote or a completed election. So Michelle Bourgeois would be the vice chair of the Planning Advisory Committee. And I would like a motion from the committee just to destroy the ballots, if somebody could make that motion.
So made.
Second.
Thank you. Now it's over to you.
Okay.
Here.
Oh, all right. I have to take a second here. Okay. Excuse me. The West Hants Regional Municipality acknowledges that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and that this land is governed by the treaties of peace and friendship signed in 1726. West Hants Regional Municipality also recognizes that we are all treaty people and have responsibilities to this land and to each other. The West Hants Regional Municipality also recognizes African Nova Scotians are a distinct people whose histories, legacies, and contributions have enriched that part of Mi'kma'ki known as Nova Scotia for over 400 years. So I guess a couple of reminders. When we all speak, we should do it clearly, I guess, into our microphones. We are we're live and being recorded on YouTube, which is different, I think, from the last time we were all here. So our fan base is going to have to do that switch from like Facebook to YouTube. And also, if there's an emergency, there's an exit back here by the CAO. There's also an exit over here. And the muster station is in the staff parking lot, which is east right there. I think the east side of the building. And Sarah, I think we'll check to make sure that everybody is out safely. Okay. All right. So we're underway. So I'm going to seek a motion to approve this agenda and ask if there are any additions or even subtractions or amendments to it. No, we're good. Would
We have an
anyone?
addition
Oh, Jane, go ahead.
under new business for Edward?
Could you say that again? Sorry.
Under new business for Edward?
For Edward. So we'll say 7-5 for Edward. Okay. Anyone else? Can I get a motion to approve the amended agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Counselor. Someone second, please.
Second.
Thank you so much. And we'll put that to a vote. All those in favor, a clear show of hands. Okay. Any opposition? No. Okay. Unanimous vote. So does anyone have, excuse me, a declaration of conflict of interest for any of the files I think that we're going to talk about tonight? Yeah, Abe.
Once again, Chair, 9.10, file 23-04 development agreement, various PIDs on Payson Drive. I own land in that vicinity, or I own those lots actually. So any discussion on that, I'll recuse myself.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Anyone else? No? Okay. So the minutes were sent out from the last meeting. And I think that, there were some different people around the table then, but I'm sure that everyone received those minutes. So I guess I'll seek a motion to approve those minutes from our last meeting.
So moved.
Okay. Yeah. I heard Jim and Jane there, so we've got a motion moved and a seconder. So all those in favor, clear show of hands. Okay. Any opposition? No. Okay, perfect. So we're going to move on to new business. The first file is 7.1, Planning and Heritage Advisory Committee Orientation Presentation. So we have a couple of people, I think, who are going to take that on. So I'll hand the mic over.
Thank you, Chair. We're going to try and make this as painless as possible, but just a reintroduction to the Planning and Heritage Advisory Committee for those that are returning and for those that are new, just to bring you up to speed on a few items that we will be looking at as we move through some of the topics that we discuss at this committee. So just before we get started, I'm Sarah Poirier. I'm the Director of Planning and Development, and Carrie Fougier, our Manager of Planning, will also be going through this presentation with me. Trying to make this presentation interactive. So if there's any questions throughout, feel free to stop us and we will answer them as we go. We want to make sure that you have all the information as we get started, and I will send out this presentation following the meeting as well, so you have that in your records. So a short agenda for this presentation, just an overview of what is planning, the planning documents, the types of applications you may see come through this committee, the process for an application, how it gets to this table and where it goes from here, the roles and responsibilities, and any major projects that we're working on as well that you might see come forward. So in terms of planning, obviously we have a picture of the Jetsons here, which may be unrealistic for us, but what does the community want to become is the first question that we ask. We look at basically a 20+ year timeline. So in this example, it might not be flying cars, it might be more accessible and effective rural transportation system, for example. So how do we get there? We look at what kind of land uses would help us get the community there. So for example, is it more compact development that includes a hospital, grocery store, schools, services that people really need around the places that they live? And then we look at where should these land uses be located. So all of our planning documents have maps attached where we designate areas for specific developments such as residential, commercial, industrial, for example, and make sure they're in compatible areas so that there's no, not necessarily no conflict, but less potential for conflict. We look at what conflicts can arise from those land uses. So for example, in this case, maybe it's residential too close to agricultural uses. If we have a large, dense population, maybe it's concerns with garbage collection, where that garbage does go once it leaves here. And then also animals, household livestock, and any of the concerns that may come with that. And then in terms of how we can prevent or minimize those conflicts, it is within the planning documents. So municipal planning strategies, land use bylaw, and subdivision bylaws. Those are the rules that we follow in terms of development in our community. So we'll just go into the planning documents. Again, I've just mentioned those, but we'll go into them in a little bit more detail. So our overarching planning document is our municipal planning strategy. That creates the policies of council. Then we have the land use bylaw, which is the regulatory document, and we have the subdivision bylaw that deals with the division and addition of land. So just currently to note that we have separate documents for Windsor, Hantsport, and West Hants, and we'll talk about the plan review as one of our major projects that we have coming forward or kind of in process right now, which is to consolidate and create one regional plan for each of these for the municipality. So again, the municipal planning strategy sets out council's intent for development, and that's on that 20+ year timeline. The policies are the policies of council, so those are approved by a council, and those are what staff evaluate applications against. In the text of the municipal planning strategy, it's divided into sections with background. So there will be background on, say, agriculture, and there will be policies specific to that designation. That document also includes a generalized future land use map, which shows the different designations and the overall intent for those areas. So that may be agricultural, residential, or commercial in the future. In terms of the land use bylaw, our second document, these are the regulations to achieve the goals of the municipal planning strategy. So these are administered by the development officer through development permits that get issued based on the regulations in that document. In the text, there are sections dealing with general matters such as signs, parking, household livestock, home-based businesses. There's specific zones, so we'll have a number of residential zones that may be permitted. And then they also have a section on definitions, which guides the intent of some of the land uses that are permitted. And then the map that's attached to this document is the zoning maps. You'll hear sometimes there are people that apply for zoning changes. So it would be an amendment to the map of the land use bylaw that they're applying for. And the last document we have, which we don't necessarily deal with a lot at this committee, is the subdivision bylaw. And that regulates changes to property boundaries, including the division and addition of land. Again, that is administered by the development officer. Somebody would get a surveyor to complete a survey plan, submit that for approval, and the development officer would approve that if it meets all the requirements of the subdivision bylaw. In that document, it mainly has text, which outlines the plans and the process for approval, and the requirements, charges and agreements for lots, maybe public and private road requirements, water, sewer, parkland, and infrastructure are all dealt with in that document. So the last slide in this section is just how they all work together. So on the high level, we have the designation, which is outlined on the generalized future land use map of a municipal planning strategy. And again, that's council's overall intention for the 20-year timeline. So for example, this is the agricultural designation. They want the commercial designation to be larger and the residential designation to be on this side. That then flows into the regulations in the zoning of the land use bylaw, which outlines what zones are permitted in those designations. So for example, here, agricultural zones are permitted both in the agricultural designation and the commercial designation. Commercial zones are obviously encouraged in the commercial designation, and sometimes there's overlap again with residential zones within the designations as well. And that ultimately the zoning ends up in the types of land uses we see throughout our communities. Are there any questions on that section so far?
Clarification. I see the the commercial expanding into the agricultural. What is an example of that?
Through you, Chair, to guide. So in our growth centers, in West Hants planning documents, for example, there are the growth centers of 3 Mile Plains and Falmouth. There's still remnants of agricultural land uses in those growth centers, even though council has designated them for future commercial growth. There may still be land that's used for agricultural purposes at the current time, but the overall intent of council is to guide that to be commercial development in the future.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, Mark, go ahead.
Yep, through you, Chair. I'm just wanting some clarification for myself. When people are bylaws, they use that. It's a guideline for purchasing and where people want to spend their life and invest their futures and that sort of thing. when we see something over and over and over being put through development agreement in areas where people have invested themselves, for example, right now we're seeing apartment buildings over and over and over, certain heights, and the residents are objecting to them every time one's going up beside them. Should our bylaws be doing more to protect that designation that they purchased into, and I guess be more stringent on just no. This is kind of the maximum we can put in certain areas, and I'm just seeing this just over and over with development agreements, obviously, because they fall outside the bylaws inside those zones. So.
Through you, Chair, to Mark's question. So that's a great question. As I mentioned, we currently have 3 separate planning documents that were created and approved by council in 2005 to 2008. So they are outdated. That's why we're currently going through the planning document review to tighten those up and determine what council feels is appropriate. As mentioned previously on the municipal planning strategies slide, there's policies that are the policies of council that allow council to consider those types of uses by development agreement. So there could be changes to those if that's what council feels coming forward in the plan review. But I think at the time where we were looking for more development to happen in the area, they were looking at different opportunities and how those would be considered. So development agreement seemed like the best option. And now we're in this housing spurt and everybody's using that avenue to kind of create new housing in the communities. So it's definitely policies of council that guide those applications being able to come forward. And especially from our review perspective, we just make sure that they meet all those criteria that are in those policies. But it's definitely something to consider for the planning document review if we want to be that open, or we want to provide different options, or we want to stick to the designations more specifically than we currently are.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So moving on to types of applications. So there's 5 main types of applications just listed there on the slide, and I'll go through each one in more detail. So we'll just move on to the next slide. So firstly, we have as of right applications. So these are applications for subdivision and development that meet the criteria of the MPS and the provisions of the land use bylaw. So these are approved by a development officer, and council does not see these applications or this committee. But council does have influence, of course, over these by adopting the provisions and policies within the MPS and the land use bylaw. Next slide. So secondly, we have MPS amendments. So those can be text amendments or map amendments. And those are usually triggered by changes in the environmental, social, and economic climate. So basically new policy direction or a change in policy direction. And how this works is we receive an application, or it might be something that's staff initiated or council initiated. So we consider the MPS policies, the legislative framework. We review similar policies elsewhere. So we do kind of a best practice review, discuss options with this committee, and ultimately it'll go to council for approval. So just a note, the map on the slide there is of the Nesbitt Island designation. So this is a designation that was specifically created for that area in anticipation of future mixed use development on that site. Next slide. So things that we consider when looking at MPS amendments are things like sewer water services, the public interest, public opinion, transportation infrastructure, fire and emergency services, provincial and federal requirements, economic opportunities, diversity and inclusion, and things like watersheds and marshlands and a variety of things. So there's a lot that we take into consideration with these applications. So next, we have land use bylaw amendments. So those can be text or map as well. So map amendments are more commonly known as rezoning applications. So why do we do this? So a policy in the municipal planning strategy, the MPS, allows council to consider amendments and changes to zoning. This is the only criteria considered for this type of application. So the intent and the policies of the MPS. And rezoning does not just permit the use that the application is requesting, but all of the uses that would be permitted in that zone. So that's an important consideration. So basically how this is done, we consider the criteria in the MPS policy. We talk to stakeholders and then develop the necessary amendments to address the criteria. And then that would go through an approval process as well. And just this map is kind of the next sort of level down for that same area I mentioned on the previous slide. So this is the mixed use zone created for that anticipated development, which is on the old textile mill site. So next we have development agreements, which we already kind of brought up tonight. So the MPS allows for property owners to enter into an agreement with the municipality to develop their property in situations where as of right development is not an option, where it might not have been anticipated in the planning documents, or typically for larger applications, so like wind farms or larger, higher density developments. So this allows council to have just a bit more say over the ultimate development on the site. And basically how this works is, again, we consider the criteria in the MPS, contact stakeholders. There's some room for negotiation, but essentially the MGA really limits what can and cannot be regulated. So what can be put into that ultimate agreement. It's ultimately enforced by the development officer after it's been approved by council and registered onto the title of the property. So some of the active development agreements that we have on the go. So we have 75 active development agreements dating back to 1989, with the newest being in 2024. The largest for land coverage includes the Crossing, Forest Lakes, and then some of our wind turbine development agreements. So some examples, I kind of already mentioned this, but large-scale multi-unit developments, long-term care facilities, campgrounds, recycling depots, distilleries, wind farms, so things that might just need a little bit more care and attention. And just a note there, in the Hansport MPS, we do not permit any uses by development agreement, so there's no development agreements in that area. And lastly, we receive heritage applications as well. So property owners have the option to designate their property as a heritage property if it has historical, cultural, or architectural significant value. So that is done through, we have a bylaw, and that's done through an application process that is brought to PAC and ultimately council. So, and then within all of those heritage properties, we do have a heritage grant program where heritage properties can apply for a grant to help with the upkeep and the preservation of their structures. So we actually have an application tonight that I'll be presenting. So I'll go into a little bit more detail with at that point, but essentially it's a grant program available to up to $10,000, up to 50% of their cost within a 5-year period. So next, or maybe we'll just stop for questions before I move into the process.
Yes. Chair, curious, I read 1989 active development agreement. I was 24. How is that possible?
So through your chair, if I'm understanding your question, so yeah, in 1989, there was a development agreement approved and it would have been registered on that property. So it remains there until it's formally discharged.
Okay. But when you have a development agreement, don't they have to have it running in 120 days?
Sarah, maybe you want to.
So it's You have to have the development agreement signed after it's approved within 120 days. And then there's stipulations in the development agreement for how long you have to get the business started, for example, or the residential use started. I'm not sure what this specific development agreement was for. It was probably for residential uses in former town of Windsor, I would think. And the development agreement runs with the land. So unless the zoning permits that use in the future, the development agreement has to stay registered to the property, even though the development might have taken place, just to make sure we still allow them that permitted use.
Mark, go ahead.
Yep, through you, Chair. Can a development agreement, when it's not approved, it can be challenged through the URB board?
Through your chair, yes, there is a 14-day appeal period once a council decision has been made on the development agreement.
So the reason I ask that is because everyone starts with council may consider. So it's really not a consideration. If council considers it and they say no, it can still be overturned and the development agreement be put through.
Yes, sorry, Carrie. Yes, a decision of council whether to approve an application or to refuse an application can be appealed either by the property owner or abutting property owners to the UARB, and they will look at whether council acted within its municipal planning strategy to make the decision, and that's how they determine whether they overturn the decision of council or they uphold the decision of council.
Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sort of in line with the question that was asked by Guido, he asked it from the standpoint of an active development agreement, and 89 being the one that's been approved, but nothing's happened with it. Do we have inactive? Is that what we would consider that? Do you know what I mean? Like, do we have inactive development agreements, ones that were,
Through you, Chair, I guess I'll take this question. So there are a number of development agreements. So the goal of the development officer is to go out and assess every property that has a development agreement every year. At the end of the year, they submit a report to the director of planning that says nothing's really happening on this property. Here is our recommendation to discharge this agreement. So there's one, for example, in an area of the rural municipality where a lavender farm was permitted. It's never been established. So it's not necessarily an active agreement, but they don't want to discharge it. They want to keep that on their property in case they ever want to operate that business in the future. So there are some that are in that situation where there may be nothing have happened yet. We're recommending discharge. They want to keep the agreement in place in case they decide to do something in the future.
Thank you. And it's really in the weeds, but do we have any sense of the number of inactive or those that could be discharged within the region? Does that become an issue over time, or is it, I mean, we're barely aware of them, so I'm guessing that it probably doesn't, but.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Ivey, we do have a running list of all the development agreements that have ever been approved. I would also say there's another example of the Forest Lakes development, for example. It's not necessarily an active development, but it's not something that has been requested to be discharged because of the potential future there. So there are a number. I do have that number, but I don't have it on me today.
It's okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mark, go ahead.
Yep, through you, Chair. This is curious for myself again. The development agreements would be part of the municipal planning strategy and moving forward for your future development, that sort of thing. Why would we have a two-tier system in our area that Hantsport would have no development agreements and the rest of West Hants has to deal with development agreements?
Through you, Chair, to Mark's question. Again, former town of Hantsport had its own planning documents. At the time, they determined that they didn't want to use development agreement as an opportunity for developments. The only opportunity in Hantsport is to rezone properties, and that's less restrictive in the sense and less control of council to permit something that way. But that's the only avenue they took. So during the plan review, that would be something we would be looking for consideration by council on whether they want to add that opportunity in there, what would be appropriate to be considered by development agreement if that's a tool that council wants to use.
So would other communities have the ability to put forth that they don't want development agreements in their communities?
Potentially, there's a lot of engagement that's going to happen with the plan review. So obviously, if that's something that's of interest to residents, they should participate in the planning document review. That's ultimately the best place to set these policies and recommend to council what's appropriate in certain communities. Yeah.
Counselor.
So just for clarification purposes, because what I thought I understood when you answered, and I apologize for not pronouncing your name correctly, Guy. Neither.
You can go even with G. It's great.
G. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Was that once a development agreement is in place, if they are operating whatever was approved within that development agreement, in order for it to continue to operate, unless that area has been rezoned for that purpose, that development agreement must remain in place in order for them to continue operating. So it's not that they're inactive, it's that in order for that agreement to stay active and to permit them to continue to doing what was approved for them to do, that it has to remain in place.
Correct. But there's
Okay.
still also other agreements, like I mentioned, like Forest Lakes, for example, where there's no real active development happening in association with that development agreement. We wouldn't necessarily consider that an active development agreement at
Okay.
this point. Yeah.
So there's both.
Yes, exactly.
Any other questions?
Just
Yeah, Michelle.
through you, Chair, just to close up on that, I guess, in the event of the development officer doing that annual assessment of active/inactive development, is a development agreement kept open at the request of the property owner, in spite of, if the development officer suggests that there's nothing happening? If the property owner says, I'd like to keep that open, is that just granted as a matter of course, or is there a process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in most development agreements, it does require concurrence by the property owner to discharge the agreement. We would, if they were looking to discharge, we would bring a list to council to say, these are the property owners that we recommend are discharged. We've reached out to the property owner and they concur with the discharge. A lot of the time, these residents, don't know that they have a development agreement if they've bought the property and it permits a use that they never thought of. And sometimes they do know about the development agreement. They haven't started their business and they want to keep that for future opportunities. So it wouldn't be something that we'd recommend to council if the property owner isn't in agreement, because then it creates this legal situation. But it's definitely something that we'd like to start doing, bringing forward those ones that we recommend for discharge and that property owners have agreed to discharge them so that we reduce the amount of development agreements that we have to administer.
Yeah, go ahead,
Thank
please.
you. Through you, Chair, probably this is not yet the moment to speak about it, but I might suggest for efficiency, always regarding this point, we spoke about it now, that we might consider going by year, beginning from very old, and reconsider those agreements and those planning and just update. I don't know if there is a motion. We don't have a motion here, but I'm thinking beyond 10, 15 years, it could be good to refresh the system for the council to consider, or whatever is the planning, development, the developers, to update these things, because I find 1989 kind of a remote age, and people should be aware of what they have or what they don't in their land development. Thank you. Just a consideration.
Other questions or comments? No? Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, we'll continue. So in terms of the process for planning applications, essentially we start with a property owner wanting to start a new business or develop their property. They'll come into us. Our development officers will evaluate the inquiry based on the land use bylaw. So if it's permitted under the land use bylaw, the development officer can move forward with issuing a permit for that. If it's not, it would be handed over to the planners to evaluate what other options within the MPS are available. So if there is a policy option that would allow for an amendment or the DA to allow development to occur, that we'd move forward with that. But in some cases, there is no policy option that council could consider that business or development. Next slide. So once we get an application, we start off with a public information meeting. So that's a meeting to present the application in conjunction with the applicant to the public and have the public ask questions and sort of have that dialogue back and forth about the application, moving through to a staff review, moving to PAC review and recommendation, council first reading, and then finally public hearing and second reading at council. And then from there, it would go to notice of approval in the local paper or ministerial approval. And then a 14-day appeal period would follow, or that notice of ministerial approval. So the whole entire process can take about 6 to 8 months. For some of these more complicated applications. So yeah, passing it back to Sarah. Oh, question.
Yeah, Jane, go ahead, please.
Thank you. What is the average amount of time for ministerial approval to be received?
Through you, Chair, to Jane's question. It kind of depends on the application that's submitted. If it's a full planning document review, for example, it might take 1 to 2 months. Most of the amendments that we've been sending are done within 30 days, but others can take longer just depending on what kind of application or amendments have been made. Okay, so sorry.
Nope, I was just looking for
Okay.
questions. No, you.
One of our last sections is just the responsibilities. So I'll just start with responsibilities as the municipal planner, and we'll move into the responsibility of this committee and then the responsibility of council. So as a municipal planner, we deal with, as mentioned, public inquiries. We receive a lot of inquiries and only a certain percentage do actually reach this committee. We deal with heritage inquiries, including designations and grants. We do background research and policy review for any projects that council puts forward to planning department. We advise committees and councils on those projects and applications, and we do have some major projects such as the plan review and the Housing Accelerator Fund, which are taking up quite a bit of time at the moment. The types of applications, as mentioned, that we deal with, municipal planning strategy amendments. So in the past, we've dealt with cannabis legislation, indoor storage, household livestock, and the development of commercial development districts across the growth centers. We deal with development agreements. So we've had wind farms, obviously, distilleries, chiropractic clinics done through development agreement. We also deal with discharge of those agreements if requested by property owners. And then rezoning applications. In the past, we've had auto repair, aquaponics, and institutional rezoning to residential, for example. Things that planners do not consider, which are not related to the land use specifically, include the applicant, whether it's an individual or corporation, their history, the viability of their business plan, property values or potential effects to property values, the taxes a property owner pays to the municipality, the ownership of the building or properties, whether that's going to be condo, rental, sold to private owners, and speculation as to the future use of the property. We do take the applicant at face value when they apply for a rezoning or a development agreement. I see KJ has.
Yeah, KJ, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is about the business plan viability. If the planning team isn't looking at the business plan, who is in the municipality? Because that's really concerning to me. If like planning or any proposals coming to the municipality, they'll fully doing a deep dive into the business plan. Isn't that that's worrying from my standpoint?
Yeah, through you, Chair, to KJ's question. From a planning perspective, it doesn't have a bearing on the type of land use that we want to promote in a community, so we don't look into it, and I don't believe any of our other departments would. It is the best practice of a business owner or property owner to make sure their project is viable before they come through our process, but it's not a requirement by any means, so it's not reviewed on our level at the municipality.
I have to follow up. And is that common practice in other jurisdictions?
As far as I'm aware, in terms of planning and land use development, yes.
Other questions? No? Okay.
So I just wanted to touch on subject matter experts. I think Carrie had mentioned in some of the applications that we deal with, we do reach out to stakeholders or subject matter experts. So you'll hear us talk about this as we go through an application review. And I've listed some of the subject matter experts that we reach out to on a regular basis on this slide. So that would include the Public Works Engineering Division, if it's municipal serviced by water, sewer, or stormwater, our traffic authority, whether that's municipal for the former towns or the Nova Scotia Department of Public Works, our development officers, as well as our manager of building and fire inspection services, the fire chief to ensure that there is adequate fire protection for those proposed uses. And we look for comment from the school board as well if there's a new use that's particularly residential uses, that's a large population that would be added to the community. Others that we might reach out to, depending on the project, would be Department of Environment and Climate Change, Nova Scotia Power. There may be other community cultures and heritage, for example, if it's related to a heritage property. And one of the things that I just wanted to mention is related to the criteria, and the reason that we ask these subject matter experts is because there's criteria in the policies of council which specify, for example, this one, whether the proposal is considered premature or inappropriate in terms of the adequacy of fire protection. So as a planner, I'm not a subject matter expert in that. So I do reach out to the fire chief to provide their expertise on what should be considered by council for rezoning or a development agreement. So in the past, in particular related to high-rise buildings, they've asked for 360-degree access to the building, hydrant locations and fire department connection locations to be considered, as well as rolling curbs for any pedestrian access ways and mountable curbs so that the fire trucks, if they're mounting the curb near the building, they're not going to get any tire damage. So other items that they may request or suggest are secondary emergency access and the location of dry hydrants if it's in a rural area as well. And then we get to this committee and council. So in terms of the Planning and Heritage Advisory Committee, you are a recommendation or advisory committee to council that makes recommendations to council. So you recommend on applications in relation to the policies and the municipal planning strategy. You can recommend that it does not meet the criteria. However, we do like it to be specified which criteria, because if we ever come to that appeal process, we want to be clear on why we think it's not been met. So the recommendation, either way, whether you recommend in favor of it or opposed to it, it does go to council for consideration and final approval. And then ultimately council makes the final decision. They can also decide that it does not meet the criteria. And again, we would just ask them to specify which criteria it does not meet in case it does get into that appeal process through the UARB. Are there any questions on those slides? No, we're at our last section here. Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Just one quick on the interesting that it comes up, and we've got a few later on in the updates there where council rejected some proposals that have been put forward, and there's been appeals and the like. And good, I think at this side, if it was also communicated there as to why they were refused, but equally even on this, sometimes when we're speaking, we think it's clear what we're saying about why we're voting no on something, but it isn't always. What's in our mind may not be what's being communicated. But I think it is a good thing just to be more clear on that, and appreciate seeing that in here as the point that we try and do that. I think it's good.
Okay, so we're going to just touch on two of our major projects that we have on the go that you might be hearing a lot of in the upcoming year. So first, we kind of briefly touched on this earlier, but the planning document review. So basically, this is a chance for us to review the current planning document. So as mentioned, we have 3 sets of documents based on the Old Town of Windsor, Hansport, and then West Hants. So basically, our goal through this process is to, I guess, consolidate all of the documents and make the necessary changes to update them. Basically to accommodate the changes in the environment, the social and economic climate, and any new sort of policy direction that council might have. Typically, planning documents are reviewed at semi-regular intervals. That's the goal, but definitely sometimes they can become outdated. So the last plan review was conducted in 2008. So it's definitely time for an update and a refresh. So basically, we want to have one set for the entire regional municipality. So it's much more user-friendly. It's much more easier for staff, committees, and council to interpret and enforce. So we are currently working on preparing with a WSP consulting firm, preparing draft documents. So we've already completed some background review, land use survey, and some public consultation. We did have an initial council workshop, but we plan on bringing that the newer drafts or the more final drafts back to council for their feedback before moving forward with final public consultation, and then presentation to this committee, and then hopefully moving forward to council for final adoption. Hopefully, midway through next year is our goal now, to have those final documents.
Perfect. The other major project that I wanted to mention or highlight, because obviously Will's speaking to some of the initiatives in that project tonight, is the Housing Accelerator Fund. So West Hants was one of, I think, 7 or 8 municipalities in the province of Nova Scotia that received funding through the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, or CMHC, through a federal program called the Housing Accelerator Fund. So we've received just over $1 million over the next 3 years to implement innovative strategies to accelerate the development of new housing projects that meet the needs of our growing community. And the main 3 pillars of that is to remove barriers to our existing planning documents, streamline our regulatory processes, and facilitate partners with developers and landowners. So as part of the requirements of the submission of the Housing Accelerator Fund application, we did have to submit a housing action plan. Our housing action plan specifies 7 actions that are required to be completed in order to get the next installment of funding up to that $1 million. So these are our 7 actions. We have completed one already, which was to remove the permit fees for accessory dwelling units, which was completed by council earlier this year. The other actions, Will's going to talk about the first 3, which is to allow greater density as of right, create affordable housing policy requirements, and reduce parking requirements. These are all amendments that will be coming forward in the next few months to the committee for consideration. The next 3 are over the next few years. So promoting infill development, promoting alternative housing forms, and upgrading our permitting software to remove any barriers that we have to be able to submit applications. KJ.
KJ, go ahead.
Thank you. Just for clarification, these 7 action items were items that the municipality decided to put forward, or were they connected with the funding?
So we decided to create a housing action plan, and we developed these 7 action items to put forward for the funding. As part of the funding agreement, now we're held to complete these these initiatives to receive the installments of funding.
And just so I could get better understanding here, and these action items came from like the community consultation that you folks did? Because I was just looking at the document in the,
So not necessarily for the community consultation that we did as part of what Will was presenting tonight. These were best practices across the country in terms of how to kind of promote alternative housing forms, remove barriers from planning documents, etc. So there was no specific engagement done at the beginning of that process to create that housing action plan.
Mark.
Yeah, through you, Chair. How secure is that funding? Do we have it now? Or when there's a change of federal government and that program gets canceled, are we still getting it?
We have an agreement with the federal government to provide that funding as long as we implement the action items that we've agreed to implement. So it comes in 4 installments over the next 3 years.
Other questions, Jim?
Yeah, thank you. Is this the last slide on this section? Okay, so I didn't want to. So I get what I find interesting with what we have between the Housing Accelerator Fund and the document review is that some of what I see in the Housing Accelerator Fund from the information that we've got coming, and I don't want to jump ahead either, but it appears or can presuppose over the planning document review. And I'm wondering how we parallel those. I look at the timeline on the Housing Accelerator Fund, understand, funding tied to that. Because I can also see between this document and the one that we haven't really gone through on the plan review yet, that there's some conflicting points of view. And even, as height, for example, in the planning document review, we had information that showed there was a majority that were in support of 3 stories as a right. And it took combining the other 2 categories, 4 to 5 and 6+ to get it in this one, to get it that it was a little bit more leaning towards higher density when you do it. So how are we looking at managing what can be conflicting information between those 2 studies that we've done, or the 2 components? And it may just be that, we can still achieve the same thing, but it's how you do it. As somebody points out in here, that you can get increased density if we have, increased triplexes and the like as a right at 3 stories and less, without doing any comment on that as to what our plan is for that.
Through you, Chair. We are keeping WSP up to date as we go through this, obviously, Housing Accelerator Fund project. We do have more stringent deadlines with the Housing Accelerator Fund project. We were pretty vague in what we're suggesting in terms of allowing greater density as of right. So we're at this point in time, and Will can correct me if I'm wrong, we're not looking at changing the heights requirements in the zones. We're only looking at how do we increase density in terms of allowing more units as of right within those parameters. So it might not end up being that we do a full thorough review of all the height requirements and all the additional pieces of that before we do the plan review, but that would obviously, both surveys would inform the planning document review to make sure it's the best avenue moving forward for the municipality.
Thank you. So, I'm not sure how to phrase. I'll say, and I may have to fix it, but so implementation of anything within the Housing Accelerator Fund wouldn't necessarily override changes that we might be making in the plan review. Like, it's not like whoever gets there, whichever one shows up first, automatically gets injected into the other.
I would say we are using what we're doing in terms of the Housing Accelerator Fund as like the baseline of what council finds acceptable for planning document changes in the plan review. WSP might find that we push it a little bit further to allow more as of right, like you mentioned about height changes, maybe setback changes, etc., in that planning document review. So I do think this is going to be the baseline for what we think of in terms of residential development for that planning document review, but it doesn't obviously tie council to making alternative choices in the planning document review as well.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of information. It's really good information. It's parsing through it to get to, especially where you have some things that it's a 52 to a 48% split and things like that. So what are the residents really telling us that they want to see? So anyways, thanks very much for that.
And that's the end of our presentation. If there's any final questions on this topic, again, I'll send it out to everybody if there's any additional questions as well.
Yeah, question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Going back 2 slides, if it's possible. Yes. No. One before. There, second point, consolidation of the currently separate document for Windsor, Hansport, and West End. I'm just considering what Mark was asking before as Hansport or West Ends having different document. Seems like talking about the specificity and the total clarity of criteria that we apply, seems like that point is referring to this consolidation and what Mark was asking. I don't know what was the purpose of Mark before asking about that, but it seems like he's speaking to your point previously. I don't know what you had in mind, but it seems like this is answering that question of Mark, if I'm correct. I don't know if I'm clear in my question, please.
Yeah, through your chair. So essentially, we are looking at consolidating all these documents to have one regional document. However, we'll still be looking at the different areas, so the growth center, separately within the document. So we could have different considerations for different areas, if that answers your question. So one document, but we don't have to have sort of a blanket approach across the entire municipality.
Additional questions for our lovely staff? No? Okay. Well, I think on that note, that's an excellent detailed presentation, by the way. Thank you. Thank you. And I know that if any of you have questions at any time, staff are always willing to answer our questions. And yeah, feel free to interrupt at any moment in any of these meetings if you have a question. And on that excellent segue, we're going to move on to our first, as a group, our first development agreement, 7.2, file number 24-21. And Alex is going to take this one for us.
All right. Thank you, Chair. I'll just wait for, there we go. Okay, so for everyone new, my name is Alex Dunphy. I'm Senior Planner here with the Planning Department at West Hants. I primarily deal with planning applications like the one I'll present tonight. And other than that, I deal with inquiries as well. So with that introduction done, I'll jump right into it. So tonight's application, we're looking at a development agreement application for 439 Clifton Avenue, and that's in Windsor. So for some background on this application, we received it from Astha Patel of Brighter Community Planning on behalf of the owner, Sarah LaRiche, on August 12th, 2024. This application was to allow the conversion of the interior of an existing single-unit dwelling and detached garage to accommodate a total of 8 residential dwelling units by development agreement. So here you can see on the left-hand side the proposed development site plan. So as I mentioned previously, it is a conversion. So the actual 2 structures that are currently on the property being the existing single unit dwelling, this larger footprint here, and the accessory garage are both already pre-existing. So already there on the property currently. So they are looking for 8 total units. So that would be 7 within the existing single unit dwelling and 1 within the existing garage. They're proposing a total of 12 parking spaces, and this would meet the land use bylaw requirement and exceeds what we would normally see in development agreement applications in Windsor. So looking at the orthophoto here, we can see that, again, the existing property has a large single unit dwelling and garage on the site. And abutting this property includes a variety of density of residential use. So that includes some higher density units, which I have some photos of later on. So that would be up to the north here, these units up top. And then across Clifton Avenue, we have the Clifton Museum Park. So that would be this section over here. And there are also some lower density residential to the east and south around Alexander Street pictured here. For our generalized future land use map, as per the Windsor Municipal Planning Strategy, this property is designated residential. Much of the surrounding properties are also designated residential, which with the park across the street being designated community use. As for the zoning, that is the single unit residential zone, similar to much of the properties surrounding. As I had mentioned, there is some higher density residential above it to the north. Those are those darker colored orange zones here, as well as the open space zone, and that would comprise the park I mentioned earlier. So here we can see a view of the subject lot from Clifton Avenue. So this would be the front view of the single unit dwelling. The access is actually from Alexander Street on the side, so in just behind these large trees here. And here on the left-hand side, you can see some of those higher density residential uses, which are abutting this property. There is a rather large tree line in between these uses and the subject lot. And on the right image, we can see some of the lower density residential uses to the south and east. And this street here, this corner is Clifton coming towards the image, and Alexander going up and to the left. So for the policies we looked at for this application, our first one here is the enabling policy 5.4.6. This enables council to consider the conversion of existing buildings to multiple unit residential dwellings of 3 or more units in the residential designation by development agreement. In summary here, the criteria are met since the proposal will not change the built form and the existing buildings currently meet the zone setback requirements. The proposal is considered compatible with adjacent land uses. The development officer, manager of building and fire inspection services, and municipal traffic authority have no concerns which have not otherwise been addressed in the report. And lastly, here we have the general criteria policy 16.3.1 just has all of the general criteria for all development agreements that we consider. In summary, the criteria here are met since the proposal is not considered premature or inappropriate for the area. And the fire chief, development officer, manager of building and fire inspection services, public works engineering division, and municipal traffic authority have no concerns which have not otherwise been addressed. So for some details about the development agreement itself, it permits up to 8 total dwelling units within the existing buildings. The setback requirements are consistent with the single unit residential zone. That is the current existing zone of this subject lot. The driveway and pedestrian access is required from Alexander Street. A minimum parking ratio of 1 vehicle parking space per dwelling unit is to be provided, and the proposal exceeds this value. And lastly, we have some buffering requirements for parking areas. The substantive matters in the development agreement, we only have one, and that is the uses that would be permitted on the property. So that is the only substantive matter within this development agreement. For our public information meeting, we held that on September 4th, and it was broadcast live on the municipal Facebook page. From now on, I think actually that was maybe our first YouTube. I'll double check that. One member of the public attended the public information meeting, and the individual asked about the timing of the project as well as the tenancy of the proposal. The deadline for comments was November 16th, 2024, and staff received no written submissions during the public comment period here. So for our process to date, as I had said previously, the public information meeting was on September 4th. Staff then did an in-depth review and brought the review and recommendation report, which was attached to the agenda tonight, November 14th. Next, we'll move on to council's first reading on November 26th, later this month, and the public hearing and second reading is anticipated to be in the new year, as our December date doesn't quite line up. If approved there, a notice of approval would be placed in the paper with a 14-day appeal period to follow. So that brings us to the end of my presentation. So I'll hand it back to the chair for any questions. And other than that, just the recommendations that I have. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have a question for Alex about this file before we? Yeah, go ahead, Councillor.
Just as a matter of accuracy, it has yet to be November 16th, 2024.
Oh yeah, maybe I think it meant to say September 16 on your. I did notice that, and then I didn't want to speak up about it.
I got you back.
Yeah, today's the 14th. It said people could submit until November 16th in your presentation. We just wanted to make sure about the date.
Oh, that must have. Apologies. I will double check that. I'm not exactly certain when that comment period would have ended. So I apologize. I will double check that and update it in the reports and the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Jim, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Nice project, particularly given its location and so on. I think that we're seeing just a couple of questions. That one is in 2.4C, it talks about the outside parking spaces, and it says that they may be the parking lot. I take it that there's no expansion on the structure itself, but it sounds or appears that there'd be an expansion of parking area on the property. Is that what I understand from that in the 2.4C? Because the conclusion on that paragraph is they may be constructed using permeable construction materials to assist with stormwater retention, which I don't know that I've seen that typically in a change in property such as this. So is that what that is? Through you, Chair, to Alex, it is parking lot expansion that's taking place.
So through you, Chair, to Councillor Ivy's question, there is an expansion to the parking area. I'll actually snap over to the site plan, and that would be the front parking area. So there's labeled 3 parking spaces here.
Sure.
The wording around construction using permeable construction materials to assist with stormwater retention, that's a generic line that we use in all of our parking additions in development agreements. That just allows the builder or developer of the property to use those permeable surfaces, and they can help with stormwater retention. So there is a small expansion to parking for this project. Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. And I'm not, I guess to be clear, so specifically focused on that, except that we have it in here as that they may use permeable to assist with stormwater retention, and just want to be conscious of the perimeter of this property and where it leads and so on. So is there a stormwater retention requirement for properties such as this and others that may show up for stormwater retention, the same way we see with other development agreements, to ensure that the pre and post storm flows don't increase? Am I?
Yep, through you, Chair. Comments from the Public Works Department didn't come back indicating a requirement for a stormwater management plan for this project. As you mentioned, it is wording may, as it's not a requirement. This is a permission to allow permeable material construction.
Thank you. And I wouldn't anticipate it with it. I just thought I might have been starting to see something showing up that we may see more of if we're that conscious of it. But so thank you for the detail on that. And then the only other point was was in 2. See if I highlighted it. Yeah, it's in 2.8B. It talks about the water and sewer services, that the owner is responsible for construction, installing, and maintaining water and sewer services on the property. And I'm assuming that's relating to laterals. It's just the wording, it could be interpreted otherwise. And we're providing the water and sewer services, but am I correct that that's the lateral? We're getting the water and sewer from the structure to the street?
Yep. So through you, Chair, that would be another generic line that if there's any increase or maintenance or upgrading that's needed for the laterals and stormwater or water piping for the project. So that would be the municipal service connection, and that's what it's speaking to there. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Michelle, and then we'll go to Paul after Michelle. Go ahead.
Thank you. I guess my question is just about 2.8A, the waste collection. Would I be correct in understanding that every resident of that 8-unit building can put garbage bags on the side of Alexander Street? And that would quickly add up to a sizable amount of garbage bags on the side of the road. We're talking probably 20 or 30 garbage bags at least. Is there any concerns that there's not adequate space to leave that there without it spilling onto the sidewalk?
Yeah, so through you, Chair, thanks for the question. I did contact our municipal waste coordinator for this project specifically, and the comment is that they would be able to accommodate that. However, it would be up to the developer of the building if they would wish to contract private garbage collection services or construct a waste container, for instance.
Okay. Paul, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at 2.1 in the development agreement use, and it talks about uses permitted in the underlying zoning and also 7, well, let's say 8 dwelling units. And my question relates to the short stay Tourist Accommodation Act, i.e. Airbnbs. And also, and I forget whether there was any discussions about, is it permissible for them to have short stay accommodations within this development, or will they all be month to month rentals? And is that stipulated here anywhere?
Through you, Chair. Thanks for the question, Paul. So we don't legislate what type of stay, so whether it's a long-term or if it's just short-term stay. And so we wouldn't include that in the development agreement. I can tell you that that question was asked at the public information meeting, and the reply from the owner is that they are intending that the units be long-term rental or permanent residency. So their intention is not for short-term rental.
Should that be stipulated in the agreement?
So through you, Chair, again, we don't legislate the term of tenancy. So to us, a residential unit is a residential unit. We don't decide how long somebody is able to stay in each of those units.
Looking at a bigger context, sorry, Mr. Chair, if I may follow up, looking at the bigger picture, should we include that type of language in the municipal planning strategy, because it is a concern in many areas where residential are now being taken up as Airbnbs?
Through you, Chair, to Paul's question. We did have one of our staff members, Mark Fredericks, investigate short-term rentals probably earlier this year or late last year, which included significant public engagement. I think over 400 survey responses from residents in our community that said they do not want council to regulate short-term rentals. So at this time, the direction of council is not to regulate them, and we would not include that in the development agreement. As Alex had mentioned, we don't regulate the length of time somebody could stay in that property.
Thank you.
KJ, go ahead. Or Mark.
No, I think.
Or Abe, go ahead. Someone.
It's okay. Gentlemen first, but I think it's quite a creative use for the property. I know previous to these individuals purchasing this property, there was others who were interested in doing much larger scale residential there. So I'm happy that this is the way it's gone, and keeping the structure and keeping the look, and it automatically fits. And but they are creating 7 new units. I had the pleasure of meeting these folks a couple of months back and having a very long conversation with them by fluke chance before this even came forward. And and they're quite established developers outside of the province and who reside here in West Hants now, and have a lot of experience doing this sort of project, and everything that they practice on other projects fits in with what we talk about around this table most of the time. So I think it'll be a very successful project, and you couldn't have two better owners doing it.
Thank you, Abe. KJ or Mark, whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, so I have a two-part question here. So the first one is, have they like outlined potential averages of rents of these units?
Through you, Chair, I'm not sure if they actually mentioned their intent on rents. We wouldn't legislate that, but I don't think that they did mention that in the public information meeting or the application.
Okay. And then my second question here is, this is just more of a curiosity. Is there a minimum amount of units where you have to outsource waste management? Because it just seems like 8 units seems like a lot that you could just put on the side of the street.
Through you, Chair. No, that's a great question. In talking with the waste coordinator, no, there isn't a hard and fast rule for units. There's a lot of different styles for how waste can be managed. So in this case, it was recommended that we allow the developer to choose the method that most fit their situation. So there really isn't a hard and fast number of units that has to go to commercial. When you're looking at 40, 50 units, it's pretty clear at that point in time, there has to be some sort of management method. But with these units, when it's below 10, it's a little more creative, I guess.
Mark, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Well, sorry, through you, Chair. Will this create an increase in sewer usage in the utility?
Through you, Chair. Yes, insofar as it's an increase in units. However, in the comments that I received back from the Public Works, the increase would be marginal, and it was not of concern to them, or it did not raise a red flag.
Okay, it's just, follow up to Abe's comment. I love the project. I think it's, it's a great project. But my concern is, I've been attending a lot of the meetings. Anytime there's a public speaker at one of our committees or council meetings, there's a lot of people in Windsor having problems with CSO events right now. And I don't know if I can support any development that's adding an increase of sewer usage until the CSO issue is resolved. Any increase, people are having sewer bubbling up in their homes and all through our communities and parks. And I just think we need to get that fixed before we keep adding more strain to the system. And this one does seem minor, but I know there's other apartment buildings coming and that sort of thing, but it just seems, we're talking about studies to find out what's happening and maybe re-engineering something. And I don't really see a clear path forward for the CSO events at all. But adding more strain to the system, it's concerning to me.
Additional questions or comments? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I was happy to hear that these remarkable people through Abe are coming to our city and developing this property, and it seems like a beautiful project. I was considering what Councillor Ivey was speaking about in the maybe of permeable surfaces. And I'm having a consideration which could become a suggestion, an advice for council to pass. We always focused a lot of attention. In the past few months, I follow council and the committee of the whole and even PACAC. We pay a lot of attention on how storm waters are managed in big development. And then engineer comes in and there are big underground pools and big pipe coming in, small pipe coming out to create the effect of water retention. I'm thinking, because I'm sure we will see over time a big quantity of small development. I am thinking if the water retention and the permeable surfaces should be implemented even in the small development of 2 units, 5 units, 8 units, because by the time we are done with Windsor in 3 years and the federal funds are coming in, a lot of people will develop and we will become a great resource for Dartmouth and Halifax. And it won't be only 300 units development or 500. It will be things like this. When I think of Stano Street, I'm thinking that every little thing matters. So I would suggest to council, not necessarily beginning with them, but that we make permeable whatever we can make permeable, even if it's a small quantity of parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions or comments about this file? Abe, go ahead.
Through you, Chair, to maybe Planner Dunphy. The previous use of the property, it was multiple use, I believe. There may have been hair salon, yoga, massage, retail-ish business. I know there was a lot of people in and out of there, et cetera, et cetera. So I myself, I see 7 bedroom type dwellings within the same building, a lesser strain on the system than what those multiple businesses and the activities of them would have been at the time. I think that's why maybe Director Richard, and then when it gets before council, I'm sure those questions will be asked to him, but I'm probably sure that's why he's stated no concern on, or very little difference on the strain on the system as to what it was currently providing, just as a comment.
Anyone else? Jim.
Yeah, my final comment, I guess, on this very topic is that there may be an opportunity or suggestion going forward that when we see development agreements coming forward, that we do look at what can be done to mitigate or minimize the amount of storm flow that goes off properties. We don't normally think about it on residential. It's the slope of our land is the slope of our land, and it goes to our property boundary and then out into the street and starts contributing at that point. But up on Highland, and I don't know if Alexander got it or not, but on Highland, we got the French drains down the inside of the curb line that runs down the street as a method and a means of dropping the water down lower and keeping it from going out onto the street the way it normally would, flowing off properties in the lake. So it may be that it just becomes a requirement going forward that we start to look at simple little things like that can keep stormwater off the street more and other matters. I know that Public Works has other initiatives already that are there by way of ensuring that eavesdropping isn't dumping stormwater into the gray water underground pipes and the like, but things like that can, in a small way, contribute to preventing it. I'm fine with this and what's going forward. I think to the mayor's comments, it would be nominal to say the very least, but to Mark's comments that for those folks that are really struggling with the effects of stormwater and its negative effects where they're living, that any small amount can still be significant. So
thank you for that. Thank you for all your comments, everyone. This file makes me think of something that one of my friends in Hansport says about this whole housing crisis, that we don't have a shortage of bedrooms and walls. We just have a shortage of places for some reason for people to be. So a development like this, I agree with you, Abe, is a wonderful thing in a lot of ways, and it meets a lot of criteria that these two were just talking about earlier in their planning in terms of infilling and development in certain places and all of that stuff. I think it sounds like a lovely, lovely plan. Anyway, so there is a recommendation on the screen. Yeah. Oh, Abe, go ahead.
I'll make the recommendation, Chair, to get the discussion going, I guess.
Sure.
PAC-HSC recommends that council give first reading, hold a public hearing to consider entering into a development agreement to allow the conversion of the existing single-unit dwelling accessory garage to accommodate up to 8 total dwelling units on PID 4504-9921 at 439 Clifton Avenue in Windsor, which is substantively the same as the draft set out in attachment B of the report file number 24-21 to the Planning and Heritage Advisory Committee dated November 14, 2024.
Thank you, Abe. Would anyone like to second this motion?
Second that.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. And further discussion. Does anyone have anything additionally you'd like to comment on before we vote? No? Okay, so I guess I just learned this. A question has been called. Is that what I'm supposed to say? The question has been called. So I will put this to a vote. So all those in favor of this recommendation, a clear show of hands. Okay. Opposition? Okay, we have one opposed, so the motion has passed. I believe there's a second part to it. If anyone would like to volunteer to read this. Abe, go ahead.
Sure, Chair. PAC-HSC recommends that council require that the development agreement with Dave and Sarah Lariche, which permits the conversion of the existing single-unit dwelling and accessory garage to accommodate up to 8 total dwelling units on PID 4504-9921 at 439 Clifton Avenue in Windsor be signed within 120 days from the date of final approval by council or the date that any appeals have been disposed of. Otherwise, this approval will be void and obligations arising hereunder shall be at an end.
Thank you, Abe.
Seconded.
Thank you, Counselor. And all those in favor, show of hands. Any opposition? No? Okay, it is passed unanimously.
Sorry, can I just check in who seconded that?
Oh,
Okay, thank you.
I keep saying thank you, Counselor, because I haven't met you, so I'm afraid to use people's names, so I haven't met them. Okay, thanks, everybody. We're gonna move on to 7.3, what we heard report from the Housing Accelerator Fund initiatives. And Will's gonna take this one, so welcome, Will.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And I will start with a brief introduction. My name is Will Hong, and I'm the planner with the municipality. So my primary focus is on the Housing Accelerate Fund project, which is the subject of my presentation tonight. So Sarah have already mentioned the background of the Housing Accelerate, and I will just go quickly over again about this project. So this is a federal funding program launched last year by CMHC, and in order to support the local municipality, speeding up housing supply and helping to us building a more complete, affordable, inclusive, and climate resilient communities. And in order for municipality across Canada to apply for this funding program, we are required to develop a housing action plan, which is attached to the meeting package for tonight. And we, with minimum 7 initiatives to support the housing development at a local level. So as Sarah mentioned, we are one of the 7 municipalities in Nova Scotia got selected to participate in this program. Many municipalities who did not succeed in the first round last year had to reapply again this year for the second round of the Housing Accelerate Fund. And again, we were approved for over $1.08 million funding over the 3-year funding period. And the presentation for today is focused on the community engagement that we did for the first 3 initiatives. And I will go more details for the first 3. And so the first one is allow greater density as of right. And essentially we want to create a more middle housing, which I will get more into that in the next slide, and streamline the approval process for this type of housing types. And the second initiative is to create affordable housing policy requirements. So this could be something like bonus zoning, bonus height for future developments if developer choose to provide affordable units in their developments. And the number three initiative is about to reduce parking requirements. And the reason behind it is because we know parking is really expensive to build, especially for those large scale developments for something like underground parking. And eventually the cost of building the parking will pass on the renters or the homeowners eventually. So reduced parking requirements will potentially reducing housing cost and increase housing affordability. And I do want to highlight that these three initiatives will be focused within the service communities in the municipality. So that is Falmouth, Hantsport, 3 Mile Plains, and Windsor. However, I will say that all these initiatives that we propose in the Housing Action Plan will benefit us all as a regional municipality by having more housing types and by having more housing choices for people to choose from and reducing the strain on the affordability. So I mentioned the missing middle housing, and this slide gives an example of what missing middle housing looks like. And essentially, the missing middle housing is meant to close the gap between the single unit dwelling, which is the most common housing stock and housing type in our municipality, and to the mid to high rise, those high density residential apartments. So missing middle housing could look like a 2-unit dwelling, a 3-unit dwelling, a 4-plex, a townhouse, or even just a secondary suite in the backyard. And there are many benefits associated with this type of gentle density. For example, they are compatible in scale with single unit residential neighborhoods. So when I say compatible in scale, we are not proposing to increase the height of the building, so it will still remain 3-story or 45 feet. And in the same time, by surprise, this type of housing actually already exists in many service area in our neighborhoods, for example, in Windsor and in Hantsport as well. And in the same time, it will offer more affordable housing option, and it will give us more housing types to choose from for people from all walks of life. And this slide summarizes the effort that we did for the engagement on these 3 initiatives between August 21st to September 30th. So we utilized our municipal Facebook page to promote these engagement opportunities. And in total, we posted 17 Facebook posts, and on average, each post have reached over 1,200 people. And we also had 127 visitors to our dedicated web page. So if you Google West Hants Regional Municipality, HAF, so that's the acronym for Housing Accelerate Fund, the top result will lead you to our dedicated project web page, which includes all the information about the Housing Action Plan, the initiatives that we are proposing, and also future engagement opportunities. And we held 2 open house sessions, and we had over 20 attendees, and we had a great participation for our online survey, which we had 320 responses. And in total, we have 376 unique comments. So that's coming from both the survey or the written feedbacks from the engagement session that we held. So this slide summarizes who we heard from. Among those 320 survey participants, 301 are residents within our municipality, and 72% live in the serviced area that I just mentioned about. So the chart on the left compares the age distribution of survey respondents to the 2021 census. So as you can see, younger residents of those 24 and under particular were kind of like underrepresented in this survey and making up only 2% of the survey participants compared to they are 24% in our population in this municipality. And we find it reasonable and understandable because many people in this age group still living in with their parents. They may have other focus in their life. They may go college out of town, and they may not necessarily live in our municipality. But when people grow, especially reaching their late 20s and late 30s, housing becomes a more relevant topic to them. And this is why we saw great participation coming from the age group 25 to 34 and the age group 35 to 44, which indicates that the people in this age group have a stronger interest in our survey topic housing. And it also suggests that they are particularly affected by the issue of housing. And because essentially they are the key groups for housing needs, as many will pursue home ownership or stable rentals. And in the meantime, we have good representation from other age groups like our senior cohort. So overall, we felt that this data offers insights into residents from different age groups, which help us guide future housing policy in our municipality. And during the survey, we asked what kind of type of housing do people live in our municipality? And this is to try to understand if there's any correlation between housing type and affordability or other statistical parameters. And what we found was really highly aligned with the result from the census data, which showed almost 80% of the housing stock or housing type in our municipality attributed to the single unit dwelling. And there were only a small proportion for the mid and middle housing that I just mentioned about. And in terms of the statistical findings, there are two findings that I want to highlight. And the first is residents who live in apartments or mobile homes are most likely to strongly support that municipalities should allow more housing types as of right. And the second finding was residents who live in semi-detached and duplex are the least likely to experience housing affordability challenges, which in another way demonstrates that mid and middle housing are more affordable to them. And so these slides have three different data sets. And the first is definition of affordable housing. So according to CMHC, housing is considered affordable if an individual or household spends less than 30% of their pre-tax income toward housing. So this could include rent, utilities, property tax, or even house insurance. And so with that in mind, we ask the survey participants whether they spend over 30% on the housing for the income toward housing. And what we found was 41% of residents actually living outside of the definition of affordability. So just slightly over half of the residents live in a place that they are affordable to live in. And another parameters we are looking at is housing tenure. So housing tenure defines the relationship one's individual have with their housing. So they could be renters, they could be homeowners. And what we found was really concerning was more than 76% of renters in the municipality reported living in an unaffordable housing situation compared to only 33% reported from homeowners. This shows the significant housing disparity between the housing tenure. And so not surprisingly, renters are more likely to support the statement that municipalities should have this affordable housing policy in place in our planning documents. So I won't go into details for every survey question from our survey because we already have all the summarized in the What We Heard report attached to the meeting package. But I do want to highlight this question number 18. So we ask, do you agree or disagree? I support more housing type in residential areas, provided they are compatible in scale that with existing neighborhoods. So we include some example, for example, duplex, triplex, fourplex, townhouse. Essentially, they are the missing middle housing that we are trying to propose. And what we found was 77% of residents agree with this statement and 13% of them disagree. And what really interesting was how it relates to other questions. For example, 42% of residents who previously disagree with question number 15 regarding greater density in serviced area now shifted their answer to agree with this statement, and 45% of residents who previously disagree with the question number 17 regarding 4 units as of right now shifted their answer to agree with this statement. So the shift in support among those who previously disagree about the ideas of greater density, about the ideas of 4 units as right, really shows that their concern may more stemming from the concern of the change of their existing neighborhood, the change of the compatibility. But when they were assured that those missing middle housing types will not be changing the character, will be compatible in scale, they begin to be more willing to accept the idea of gentle density. And this slide summarizes the key takeaway on the initiative number 1. So again, we had overall strong support for more housing options. Specifically, 77% of residents agree more housing options should be allowed in the municipality, and 63% agree with allow greater density in our service area that I just mentioned, and 62% agree with allow residential property owners with more flexibility in service area. So at the end of the day, it is up to the property owners to decide if they want to build a more housing types that will be available to them. And also 56% of residents agree with 4 units as right is a good starting point in the serviced area. And in terms of what we heard from residents who liked this idea, many expressed that this will help municipality retaining young families and the professional. And it also will promote the affordability and equity to vulnerable groups, for example, like single parent and the people with support needs. And in the meantime, middle density will allow multi-generational living and promote great density, great housing choices. And of course, we heard concern about this initiative. Some residents in state their concern about the impact on infrastructure and the parking, and some other state the concern about the compatibility with character of the neighborhoods. So this slide summarizes the key takeaway on initiative number 2 and 3, which is affordable housing and reducing parking requirements. And again, overall, we had a good support for affordable housing policy, and specifically 55% of residents agree that municipalities should incentivize developers to provide affordable housing units within their proposal. So this could be like density bonus and high bonuses. And however, we had a low support for reducing parking requirements. Only 27% of residents agree that the municipality should reduce the minimum parking requirements. And in terms of what people like about the initiative number 2 and 3, many express that affordable housing will keep senior aging in place so they could live in closer to their families. And in the meantime, it will help building our municipality, building a more inclusive community for all residents, regardless where they come from, regardless their income level. And in the meantime, it will help encourage a more walkable community. And of course, we heard concerns. Many expressed the concerns about the idea of how municipality will ensure the units will remain affordable in the long term. And some other commented that families require 2 cars for work purposes. And also people commented that there's a lack of public transit to offset the reducing parking requirements. And in terms of the next steps, so staff are proceeding with the implementation of the first 3 initiatives by preparing the amendments to the planning document. So that is our land use bylaw, that is our municipal planning strategy to incorporate the commitment that we agree with CMHC, as well as feedback from the public engagement. And just the first 3 initiatives are required to be completed by the end of March next year in accordance with the terms that we signed with CMHC. And again, the municipality will receive the next installment of funding in early 2025. However, the release of the disbursement for the next year funding is contingent on the assessment of whether municipality is achieving milestone like this committed in our housing action plan. And this is just a quick overview of the process that we will happen down the pipe. And again, we are at the PAC meeting. This is just a information presentation on the community engagement progress that we did and how residents express their opinions to these 3 initiatives. And we are working on the amendments, and hopefully we can bring to the PAC for recommendation next month, and then it will go from there. And that concludes my presentation. So I will now open for any question that committee member may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. I know I went to one of the public information sessions in Hansport, and it was very informative. Jane was there as well. And I have to say that staff put a lot of work into those sessions, and it was an enjoyable experience. So thank you for that. And I love the picture of that little thing that's in the backyard, that little ensuite or whatever. It's the cutest little building ever, and I want one. Yeah, so I know there are some questions for Will around the table. KJ, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I have a few, and I'm gonna ask one, and then I'll come back. Hopefully, I could come back. But when it comes to the funding that was secured, is there any match funding connected with it from the municipality? Like, because like $1 million is not, in the grand scheme of things, is not a lot of money. So just out of curiosity, like, sorry, Chair, and like, is there any talks at the municipality level looking at match funding or figuring out other ways to financing affordable housing, not solely connected with this fund?
I'm not sure if Sarah wants to answer this question.
Through you, Chair, to KJ's question. When we applied for the funding, there was no matching requirement for the municipality. So we did receive the funding as a grant, completely paid for by Housing Accelerator Fund. At this time, there's no discussion on the municipality providing additional funding, but it could be something that we explore if there's amendments, especially or incentivization of that affordable housing piece and how we make that actually incentivized to these local developers. And that may come through engagement with local developers to see what the parameters may be around that. And I think that would be a future, one of the future applications when we talk about infill development in particular. How do we get people to develop those properties that are in prime locations, for example? What's the incentive that would actually make them develop that property?
You, Chair, like, because like my only critique with this so far is it seems like we're fully putting our hands off on the responsibility connected with affordable housing, and we're hoping that folks who are doing in the investment in the municipality are going to do affordable housing. So that's kind of my only concern. But yeah, I have more questions. I'll sit to someone else.
Mark, go ahead.
Yep, through you, Chair. On the survey, did we ask them where they want to be in the future?
Yes, so the survey actually constitutes two set of questions. So the survey is open to everyone. So whether you are the residents of West Hants or not, you are welcome to take the survey. But we are analyze the survey data separately. So the data that I showed are the result from our resident survey, and we did receive about 19 respondents that are non-residents of our municipality. And so in the What We Heard report, there's a separate section that captures all the results from those non-residents or future residents' ideas about this survey question. So
yeah, no, I think I was meaning more towards what kind of home you wanted to be in the future. Like, for instance, for me growing up, my dream was always to get educated, get a job, find a wife, raise a family, and own a home. Right. And never was it my dream to live in an apartment. And I'm worried that if we put all of our focus on the affordable housing into these apartment units, that these people that have that dream are going to be leaving West Hants to find that. So I'm wondering, are we going to spend any of this housing accelerator fund in the single units to make them more affordable? For families, because I mean 70% whatever it was that are in single homes now, that tells me that's where people want to be, right? And I'm just wondering how much focus we're putting on them, or are we going to put it all into density apartment type homes?
Yeah, this is a good question. And so from the survey results of those non-residents, I remember about 70% of them, because we were asking what type of housing will suit your future housing needs if you were moving to West Hants in the future. And I remember about 70% of them included one of the middle housing type in their answer, and only about 20% of them selected the single unit housing as their only preference choice in their answer.
Okay, Jim.
Thanks very much, Chair, from you through to Will. Thanks for the information. And specifically, in the presentation of the information on getting the general density, but not necessarily having it being driven by height, but by the ability to get the 2 and 3 unit and the 4 units as a right. I think I'd raised it before that unit being a unit within a home, or whether it's quadplex being able to be put on a lot. And I think because different people may interpret that differently. So a 4 unit, what are we using? How are we defining that? Or are we? Is it 4 units as to whether it's 4 individual, like adding, like we did with the previous presentation of the development agreement? In that case, it was 8, but if they were adding 4 single unit apartments in there, is that the 4 units? Or is it 4, in-law suites that are built on the back of the property, which are different kind of structures, some of them. So I wasn't clear on that, but I'm not going to lose sleep on it. The parking requirement, I'm not sure that that's going to meet needs in some areas, especially in the core of downtown where the streets are already jammed as tight as they can be with cars as it is, and reducing the parking requirement on property may reduce it on property, but I don't know that we'd necessarily see a reduction in the value of the rents that may be attributed to that. I can see where landlords may take that as an opportunity not to build so much in a parking, put another unit in or whatever. But aside from that, really pleased with the general density discussion, those comments, and would support that. The affordability aspect, yeah, I think something has to happen with that too. And whether it's single units or apartments, but some way to incentivize to see that kind of a development taking place. And also pleased to see, I think it was from Carrie's comment earlier, that as we look at how we go to this increase in density, that there may be different areas where we do it. So it doesn't just become that it's open for any kind of increase in density in the urban areas, that it's scaled or scheduled, that we look at that from an urban design standpoint as to how we would look to see that development occur, that we may not want to see 6-story buildings throughout all of downtown Windsor or Hantsport or any area that is graded, that we still, in the comments are really valid. where people took the time to share additional information beyond the checkpoints. Since my final comment is that they expressed it quite clearly there what they did and didn't want to see, and that we be guided by that, I think is a good thing. But thank you for that. I look forward to seeing this proceed. And my final comment that I forgot to say is that to the conversation about the impacts of increased density, and although density is not the problem per se, what we have is a problem with the stormwater system that we have combined storm and sewer systems together. So at this point in time, not to get into a negotiation position on this, but this is the time for us to get a commitment as part of seeing the increased general density moving forward, that we also get a commitment at the same time in parallel or in advance that we see diversion of stormwater to other locations and other areas to get it out of the system. It's really difficult for me to solely support this for an increased density, increased units coming into the market. Again, it's not the population that's the problem, because we can generally handle sewage on a normal day in, day out basis, but it's because we're using it as a combined system that we need to find a way to get that done now before we start adding all kinds of increased density, not being able to deal with it. Thank you.
Through Chair to Councillor Ivy's point, I do want to add some comments regarding the infrastructure. And I do definitely, this is you're not alone in this, sharing this concern. We heard this from comments where people commenting stormwater is a big issue in our municipality. And I will say that this Housing Accelerate Fund is really more than housing itself. So we can use this funding to upgrade our infrastructure, to do the infrastructure study. And it is my understanding that the Public Works Department is already allocated a part of portion of this funding to study the integrated resource. I think it's integrated infrastructure study that they are currently doing. So we can use this money toward many ways, and it essentially is about to support the housing, so housing could be built properly. And in the same time, we are promoting this idea of gentle density. So none of these developments will happen overnight. It will gently be incrementally spread out in our municipality. So it's not site specific. So we are promoting this, it's more of promoting this idea of gentle density. So it will kind of like helping us get prepared to upgrade our infrastructure and helping us be prepared in the future. Thank you.
Just thank Chair. Thank you, Will. And I think I saw comments in your report as well too, that there is the hand-in-hand approach. It's just my comments, which may have been, is more that we not lose sight of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. G.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Three things. The first one, very quickly, is I second Jim Ivy intervention on taking this stormwater in our hands now as we see the development that will happen and bring it at home. The second one is a question for you, Will. I am clear that affordable housing means some 30% less than that. And I'm not clear on how do we as the municipality secure that affordability continues over time. One question. Second question is perhaps a little more complicated. I don't even know how to put it clearly, but I will give an example. Many years ago, in my very first life, as I was the chair of the Union of Photographers in my province, I was also chairing a committee that was giving funds for artisans, photographers, and any other artisan in our province. And it was quite clear the fact that when we were receiving $100,000, we knew exactly how many millions were we able to trickle down in facilitated mortgages and loans for artisans and business owners. How exactly the 1.08 million of the House Accelerator Fund is trickling down in our economy, in cutting red tapes and all these things? I'm I cannot wrap my head around it in the specificity of the process. And I'm sure it's a very complex question and it doesn't need to be answered now, but I would love to have a clear take as I had back then in understanding how that 100,000 liras back then, not even euro, were creating wealth in lessened mortgages for our people. So the first question is, how do we secure that the affordability is keeping over time, and then after 10 years, it becomes a very expensive rent?
Through chair to committee member. So I will try to first answer the first question regarding how we can secure the affordable units remain affordable in the long term. And this is definitely something that we discussed internally during the meeting, and to ensure how we can ensure that developers actually build those affordable units, because we as municipality doesn't have the human resources to enforce that piece. So we are thinking maybe because there are several funding program for developer to apply for to build the affordable units, either that's from our provincial government or the federal government. And so they will be required to sign the contract with the provincial government and the federal government. So they will do the enforcement piece, and they will probably have an annual check-in with that specific developers. And once they have those contract agreement in place, and then we as a municipality will then go forward with those bonus height or bonus density piece. And so that is one way that we can maintain that, ensure that those housing units remain affordable in the long term. And I'm not sure. Thank you.
Well, no, the second is definitely a complicated question, but I would love to have more clarity as to mathematically or graphically or on a map or how does this million support these many things, not just because it's been given and now is cutting red tapes, but exactly what red tapes cut and how is affording that. Certainly it's a complicated question, and it would be lovely to have kind of a presentation like that enters in that details specifically, if it's possible. Thank you.
Chair, to Guide's question. So we received obviously $1 million worth of funding. Part of that funding goes to Will's position for the 2 years that he's going to be working on the Housing Accelerator funding for project for us. So that pays his staff position and any training that he needs. It also pays for public engagement that we do if we're hiring consultants to help with research. It doesn't necessarily pay for, kind of to KJ's point, incentives for affordable housing, for example. So it's more so on our municipal operations side that we use the funding to review studies, hire staff members to make sure that we're working towards removing those barriers, having that engagement with residents to see what's appropriate in terms of those action items that we've suggested to complete through this funding. It doesn't necessarily correlate with we're going to provide this amount of funding for 5 developers to do 12 units, for example.
Thank you. Is it possible to see a spreadsheet? If it's possible, not necessarily. I'm asking, is it possible to see something like that in spreadsheet to see the utilization of money, or probably that will appear in the municipal balance? I don't know. I'm asking. I'm completely new to this. I might be putting a foot in my mouth. I'm apologizing ahead of time for that.
So we have part of our application is public. So that breaks down what CMHC was providing us for each action item and each incentive. We internally, for an operations perspective, obviously have budgeted how we're going to use that money over the next 3 years. And that we provide updates to yearly through CMHC. So it's not something that's necessarily going to be public in terms of the reporting that we do, but we do have to report to CMHC on how we're using the funding moving forward.
Thank you, Chair. And CMHC being what? Sorry, I'm fighting with acronyms.
The Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation on the
Okay.
federal government level.
Thank you.
Abe, go ahead.
I think you'd be a fly on the wall on my wall with that question asked. um, I was encouraged, Planner Hahn, that the majority of respondents were between 25 and 55. I think almost 70%. So that was interesting on my end. It's usually the opposite. It's usually an older demographic, but it was a good little cross section of respondents there. On the affordability piece for the housing accelerator, it was I think there may be some confusion within the community that it was meant to create affordable housing rather than what the intent of the program is to encourage it or how a municipality can make it easier to have it be built within the community. I think that may help alleviate some of that. But on the government side of things, on affordability, developers will stick prices on things, and they're incorporating every expense that they're incurring. So you look at deed transfer, you look at any delays that they experience with approvals, cost of applications, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things add to the cost of the housing. So sometimes we're our own worst enemy, Chair, on talking about affordability, but making it more expensive. Sometimes governments are actually, if you look at all three levels, governments are the biggest culprit of the affordability piece of housing. So just as a comment.
Thank you, Abe. Yeah, go ahead, please.
So through you, Chair, how was it decided how those funds would be dispersed and in which areas they would be used that were received? Like, is it a set guideline from CMHC that tells you how they have to be used and in what areas they must be allocated? Or is that a decision that the previous council made, or how is it decided?
Through you, Chair, to Kayla's question, just confirming like areas of the municipality or areas like in terms of the incentives that we're providing.
So we're saying that it doesn't go directly to secure or provide affordable housing, but it can be used to remove barriers or to be, is that what's set out as per CMHC, or is that what we have decided as a municipality to use those funds for?
Right. So municipalities can decide how they are going to use the money. So a lot of municipalities that received a lot more funding, like HRM, for example, might be doing more of that, providing grants to start affordable housing units or incentivize affordable housing units, versus our approach is to remove the barriers from our planning documents, do the planning and public engagement, and trying to create the environment to incentivize that without providing the necessary grants that go along with it. When we think about how much funding we don't have a lot, and I don't know if providing a $5,000 grant to a developer is actually going to incentivize them to do affordable units, for example. So we took all of that into consideration. So it's not necessarily set in stone of how we're going to use the additional funding, but we do have a draft budget of these are the seven topics that we're obviously trying to address with this funding opportunity, and here's how we're going to spread it out over the 3 years.
KJ.
Being that we do have 3 council members in this committee with us today, I will flag that it is very concerning, the conversations around the putting the emphasis on the developer. And I think that what should happen with this fund is really looking at unconventional ways of land ownership. Because if you look at what's happening within our municipality, the perception of land ownership is looking at it through a profit lens, then looking at it through a affordable housing lens. So we really should be having more conversations around what other unconventional ways to home ownership, unconventional ways to housing, and especially really diversifying what type of people are building houses and building housing within our municipality. That's just something I did not see in the report, and maybe that's not what your folks are receiving from the surveys, but it is really concerning that we're looking at affordable housing developer as the end all and be all, and there are unconventional ways that we should be taking, being that we are small enough to test for affordable housing.
Additional questions or comments for Will?
Sorry.
Yeah, Kayla, go ahead.
It's okay. I just have to, so in follow up to KJ's point, like $5,000 to a developer isn't a whole lot. $5,000 to somebody trying to purchase a small dwelling is a lot of money. So the lens that we're looking through, I would like, it's not my personal, but I'm just making a comment. It would be nice to make sure that we really are making best use of those funds for end results for our residents and what impact it's having. Yeah, I'm going to leave it at that.
Through you, Chair, to just to Kayla's point. So obviously we're not looking at like providing specific grants like funding to people, but one of the things that we are doing is this pre-approved design concept, so which will help those who are not necessarily developers, but maybe a resident, somebody that wants to move here is looking to do this middle missing piece. We're looking at putting out an RFP to have designers come in with pre-approved designs. So that reduces the cost of that person coming into our municipality. And that's something that they can take and basically get stamped by our building official. It's already approved. They don't have to wait around for that. So that reduces time and cost on that end. So although I said we're not providing a $5,000 grant to somebody, it does reduce the cost for that resident as well. So that's something we're looking into with that piece as well.
Mark.
Yeah, through you, Chair. And that was touched on a little bit around my question right there. I'm just listening. I'm trying to figure out what we're spending $1 million on. And then what I was hearing was municipal planning strategy and some bylaw amendments. And I'm just wondering what tangible, where that, I understand the hiring of another employee is one thing. But I'm just trying to, I guess, wrap my head around some of the tangible things we're going to get with this $1 million.
Can you put your slide up on the action items just again, so we can walk through maybe a little bit more detail about what we're actually planning on doing with the funding?
So I just want to mention, normally we take a break at 8 o'clock and we kind of sailed past 8. So I might actually take a washroom break, and Michelle, if you're okay, chairing the meeting for a few moments, if that's okay with everyone.
Oh, there you go.
Or would you all like to take a break? I feel like we should probably have a break. Yeah. Why don't we take a 10-minute break? Sorry about that, Vanessa. I was a little off track tonight, and then we'll come back in about 10 minutes.